Good morning, everybody. My name is Becky Metcalf, and on behalf of Design Centre Chelsea Harbour, a very warm welcome to today's Conversations in Design session. Isn't it brilliant to be back having a physical talk? The teenagers I know keep talking about IRL, in real life, which is, I'm not sure, I think I may be too old to use it, but anyway, in real life, how marvellous. A little bit of housekeeping. If I could ask you just to turn off your phones, that would be wonderful. Well, we really are in for a treat this morning because I'm thrilled that one of the UK's most sought-after interior designers is with us on our stage, Linda Borencay. Who better to interview her and to talk to her than Pip Rich? He's the editor-in-chief of Livingetc. All I can say, having seen some of the images, prepare to be inspired. So let's give them a very warm welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to join us. It's so nice, as Becky said, to be doing this in real life. The theme of today's discussion is inspiration. How to find it, how to use it, where to get it from. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I've been doing my own house refurb and trying to find inspiration for different rooms. It's separately from that. I was wandering around the harbour yesterday, having an amazing time looking at all the different showrooms and feeling very inspired. And I went to a talk at the Parada showroom by Staffan Tolgard. And he was talking about how inspiration doesn't happen overnight. It comes from sometimes months of research, collation. Knowing how to find inspiration and put it to good use is really key to everything we do in design, whether it's putting together a room or putting together a business. And there's no one better to talk on that than Linda Borencay. So for anyone not familiar with Linda, she is one of the UK's most exciting interior designers. She's known for working at Soho House, probably is the biggest thing that people are familiar with as design director. But prior to that, she's worked at Tom Dixon, Martin Brudnitsky, and she's most recently set up her own design studio, Linda Borencay Design Studio. She's also a columnist for Livingetc, and every month she puts together a shopping page of the things that have caught her eye and are inspiring her, and every month I am so inspired by them. One more thing before I get on to talking to Linda, which I know why we're all here, is the first time I ever interviewed Linda back in 2014, I was asking her then about inspiration, and she said that a lot of it came from old films. And it was the first time I think I'd ever really heard anybody talking about that in design. It was a really interesting point of reference for me, and I just am fascinated to see how that's evolved, how that's changed, and where Linda finds inspiration from now. So what I thought we'd do is we'll talk a little bit about putting together a room, and we'll also talk a bit about putting together a business, because I think some people in the audience will be interested in some or both of those. There'll also be some time at the end for questions, so do save them, and I promise we will get to them. So, Linda, thank you so much for joining me. A quick question before we get on to the main talk. What is inspiring you right now?
Right now, I'm just very inspired by the fact that London is opening up again, and we have a London Design Festival, and there's just so much to see, and I'm trying to be out and about every day after work, and I'm just very excited about the fact that we can travel again, because travel is, I've just realized during this lockdown, is probably my biggest source of inspiration, and something I took for granted for so long because it was so integrated and part of my work. And now that I can travel again, I realize how much inspiration comes from that.
Presumably over the last 18 months that we haven't been able to travel, you haven't stopped seeking out inspiration. How have you adapted not being able to travel? What have your sources been?
I mainly, my main source of inspiration was Instagram, movies, as always, and books. I just got back to buying loads of physical books and albums and trying to source vintage books as much as I can, and trying to get some vintage magazines, and just trying to go back in time and travel in my mind, the lack of physical travel.
When you talk vintage, is there a particular time period that you are drawn to?
Not really, actually. there are always waves of specific time eras that are coming to fashion, and people are inspired by it, or fashion gets inspired by it. But I actually find inspiration in all eras. Probably more the beginning of 20th century, something along those lines, but all across Europe. For example, we have a project in Vienna right now, and the biggest source of inspiration for that was Livingetc, and it's obviously a design era and a style that I was familiar with, but now because of the project we've done a lot more in-depth investigation and research, and I find it so fascinating that it slowly creeps into other projects as well now. So yes, it's not a specific era, it's always something to discover in all design eras.
So I sort of wanted to go back to the beginning of your career and finding your voice, because I think that's a really interesting time for any of us. And I think it applies to both beginning your career, working out who you are, what you want to do, and also designing a house, working out how you want it to look. Linda, when you were first starting out, I know you were modeling and you took an internship at Tom Dixon. Do you remember what you were being inspired by at that time?
I was a student in London Metropolitan University, and before I took the internship at Tom Dixon, I won an award, Britain's Best Emerging Interior Designer Award, and he was one of the judges. So this is why I got the internship, and I remember putting together that brief and that award piece, and I was very inspired at the time. Established and Sons were huge. Tom Dixon was, obviously, it just came out with the Mirrorball collection. So I was very inspired by all these geometric shapes and strong forms and very masculine interiors, and that's what my award piece was as well. And I just specifically remember that because of that reason.
Yeah, I think it's when you're in a company as well, and you're being inspired by the person at the head of the company, that's presumably a very good place to start. But how do you go about finding your own voice within that when you're working to somebody else's brief?
I think it's very important to join a company that you have some sort of similarities with, or at least some sort of admiration, respect. So you want to learn more about that specific style. I remember from Tom Dixon, I went and worked for Martin Budnicki, for example, and the two styles couldn't be more different. And so yes, it took time for me to adjust, but I really was eager to learn more about Martin's style and his use of color, and there were some specific areas that I was so fascinated by. And I think if you don't find a common voice with the company you work with, it's a real struggle. And of course, you can learn so much, and every single company has a different approach, different protocols, different strategies, but I would probably think hard before joining a company. Do you really want to be part of that and feel like that style can be part of your personal one as well?
When I started out in journalism 20 years ago, I knew so little about design, really. I remember ripping out pages from magazines and sticking them on my bedroom wall just so I could learn stockist names and furniture things, and so I could soak it all in. How did you go about starting to build up and sort of an inspiration Rolodex in your mind of images and things like that?
So I had endless USB drives full of images. At the time, there was no Pinterest, not even Instagram, obviously. We were looking at Tumblr and all kinds of design blogs for inspirations. And I found that quite interesting, a lot more interesting than now, because I think with algorithm and everything, you sort of being shown the same thing over and over again. And so I just had pictures saved. I did similar to you. I printed out my favorite images and then put them on my walls. And I remember even as a small child, my room was filled with fashion pictures and posters and music album covers and all kinds of like visual inspiration that I found fascinating. And I still love doing that. Just as if I find something interesting, just print it out and put it on near my desk.
I think it's really key to do that, because I think being able to soak it up at all times. I think when you so many of us keep stuff on our Instagram saved boards or whatever, it's just on your phone. It's locked away in a little thing.
Yeah.
It stays there and you look at it sometimes, but to be able to soak it up and just to surround yourself with it, I think there's a real value in that. I'm curious as well about, some of the pictures that were ending up on those initial mood boards, some of those things you were finding on Tumblr and all those things, were they predominantly design, or was there a real mix? Were there people in them? Was there fashion? What did they look like?
Yeah, absolutely a mix, and it's still a mix. I think a lot of our inspiration is a mix coming from fashion, from art, from movies, from travel, just interesting details, maybe just a cutout of some interesting colors. I think being an interior designer and being inspired by other interiors is less interesting or intriguing than being inspired by something more abstract. And then the result as well is it can be a lot more interesting in the end, because you're not trying to copy something or just have a different take on of a certain interior, but actually translating something visual to a three-dimensional space.
Well, that was going to be one of my questions, actually, is how you go about taking inspiration from something without just copying it, because that's something I'm really struggling with at the moment in my own house refurb. Like, I've found pictures of rooms that I like and colours that I like, and it's really hard to deviate from what's in that picture for me, because I see that and I'm like, well, great, that looks lovely, so I'll just kind of recreate that, and it's not really inspiration, that's just straight outright mimicry. And interestingly, when I was interviewing the interior designer Tara Bernard recently, she said that for every room mood board she puts together, she always includes a person in there. Sometimes it could be a famous person, sometimes it could be somebody looking away from camera, but it's that mood, that's what you're bringing in. Is that something that you agree with?
I usually imagine people interacting with the space, and I'm trying to walk through my mind how they enter a space and what they would feel like, what they hear, what they see first. It's almost like playing out the journey in my mind, and that snippet of emotion is something that I'm trying to tap into, and this is how the schemes usually start. This is how the layouts usually start, and also then from that comes the colors, the textures. It's a vibe that we're trying to manifest in a three-dimensional way, in a way. And I think that's really that's coming from working at Soho House, to be honest, because every time we started a project, we went to site, we walked to the site. It was usually an empty building, completely gutted, and you have to be able to visualize and imagine what this will look like on day one. When everything is finished, the barman is making the cocktail, and people are coming in excited, all dressed up, and that's kind of the emotion that you're trying to channel, and this is where all the inspiration then comes from.
Well, I remember seeing you when I came on a hard hat tour of White City House, and you had a hard hat on, and about 35 people walking around behind you as you were pointing and saying, this, there, and you were so in charge, and you were so on top of everything.
Oh, wow, that sounds so glamorous, but...
But you were very much, I could tell that you had a vision in your mind. And I wonder, let's talk about Soho House a bit, because I think it's a really interesting thing, because the Soho House aesthetic has informed so much of what we do over the last 15 years. And you came in relatively late to the brand and helped, I think, to move it forward and to take what was there and enhance it and put your own spin on it. How did designing a room or designing a house, how did it go? What was the process?
So the process was always involving Nick Jones, who's the founder and CEO, a couple of key people from different areas, such as myself, from design, visiting site when it's day 0, day -5 probably, and just spending a few days there, like soaking up the area, the building, the architecture, the demographic, and just brainstorming, just a few days. And usually during those first few days, we decided on a flow plan. Like, we would have a zoning plan of which floor is what, more or less the functions, and more or less the aesthetic as well. We would have a few key images during that time that we would be like, yeah, this is kind of the thing, this is the vibe that we want. And then after that, I would go away with my team and develop it further, and we would do mood boards, such as everyone else, like for each key areas, and then start the design process. And it involved a lot of site visits. We usually had a team in location as well, because we had projects internationally. So we would have a project in Mumbai, in Hong Kong, in Amsterdam, in Paris, and so we would always have a team locally as well. And sometimes even from our team, we would move people out to live there. Like, for example, for Amsterdam, we had our project architect live in Amsterdam for 2 years, and even my number 2, the senior FF&E designer, he lived in Amsterdam for nearly a year before completion. So they had the chance of completely soaking up everything in Amsterdam, and being able to source all the vintage pieces locally, and just making it very authentic, very respecting the location and what it should be all the Soho House is about.
With the creation of a mood board, is the initial mood board, is it just images and whimsy and mood, or are there sometimes fabric samples or specific pieces of furniture on there, or is that sort of phase 2?
Yeah, we always had like specific rooms worked out. Mood boards were very rarely, and even now how we work, very rarely are expression or just a figurine or like a pretty lady. Usually you look at a mood board and you have a feeling, you have a very strong feeling about the room, like the colors, the shapes of the furniture, the kind of lighting you want to use. Maybe it's not that specific one, but that's the general vibe. So quite specific early on, and then after that deciding which one we're going to make bespoke, which one we source, which one will be vintage. But quite early on we had a very specific idea about what we want things to look like.
With a room refurb, I know you're working on private projects now. You've got houses, you're doing projects all around the world, and one of them is a private house with 6 bedrooms. Are you mood boarding each individual room? How does that process work?
Yeah, absolutely. We mood board every single room. We do visuals. It really depends on the client, how they're used to working with interior designers. Usually, if they are, that's a lot easier because they understand the process. But if not, it's a lot about communication, because I think a lot of people don't appreciate how much work goes into it and how much time it takes. So it's really holding their hands throughout the process and making them involved and part of it. Because at the end of the day, residential design, it's all about them. It's all about their expression. It's their extension of themselves in an interior design world. So they really need to feel like it's a true representation of their own personality.
I should say that the images going around on the screens are actually images that Linda supplied that are inspiring her at the moment. And I think it just goes to show how varied your sources of inspiration actually are. From a quote to an image to a person. Do you find it quite easy to find the right images at the right time? Have you got like a big folder somewhere with everything in it? You just chuck stuff in and you sift through?
Yes, I wish I had that. And I keep promising myself to do that. But unfortunately, no, I have images all around the place. And usually they live in project folders because each image is very specific to project folders. But when I started my own studio just over a year ago, I did some deep soul searching, and I did go through my libraries, and I did select all the images that I found I kept going back over the years, and I found very, very deeply connected to my own taste. So now I have a more organized a folder with the images that I always cherish and love, and yeah, these are something that I keep referring back to.
And that was actually a really useful tool, wasn't it? I remember we've spoken about that before, about you working out the DNA of your own private business, you know, going from working for other brands and putting your spin on them, as I said, but, ultimately working to somebody else's brief a bit more, but someone else's aesthetic, working out your own aesthetic, which I think is so, probably some people in this room are setting up their own agencies or setting up their own businesses or starting out. I think that's actually quite a useful thing to do, isn't it? To sift through and work out what it is you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we are all chameleons. We are trained to be chameleons because we always have to adapt to a client's brief. And then also if you're working for a big brand, you're going to adapt to that brand's aesthetic. And my mind was wired to the Soho House aesthetic for so long. I started to lose who I really am, and that's just a normal part of being, part of a bigger organization, and especially that the organization values were so close to my personals as well. So when I broke free, I actually had to really shed my layers like an onion, trying to go deep and did my own mood boards, the mood boards that I felt are true to me about objects, about lighting, about interiors, about architecture. And so I actually had a friend, a very good friend of mine, helping me with that process, who's very familiar with branding. And so we had a lot of sessions together, and it really helped me see myself from an outside as well, and more rationally, and to create my brand values, which is extremely useful when you're starting your own business, I think. You need to know yourself the most.
I think it's probably a really useful tool for anybody, and not just setting up a business, but just if you're trying to work out just how to do anything. Can you remember anything that was on those mood boards, any specific pieces of architecture or any films that were on there that were inspiring you?
Yeah, so the reason why I included I Am Love by Luca Guadagnino is because that was a movie that I didn't know Livingetc before that movie. And I saw that movie and I was completely besotted by this amazing architecture and the house. And I did some research, and obviously since then, being fortunate to have been to Milan a few times, I visited every time. Every time I would go to Milan, I would take a few hours just to go to this house, and it's such an amazing source of inspiration, and just delving more into the architect himself as well, and the work he's done before, Piero Portaluppi. If you feel like looking him up, he was an amazing architect at the beginning of the 20th and mid 20th century, and I was very, very inspired by this house and how everything is so considered, from the marble pattern to the radiator covers. They all make sense. The ceiling detailing to the joinery detailing, they all talk to each other. It's an amazing, well considered and beautiful project, and something that doesn't happen very often anymore, unfortunately. It's when a person, an architect, can put their own stamp on every single detail of a house, furniture and lighting included. So yeah, that's definitely a project that I keep going back to for endless source of inspiration.
I was going to ask, actually, do you find you reuse images for different projects, or are they one and done?
Well, try not to, because obviously because our mood boards are so specific. They're usually a specific furniture and lighting. So not reusing it, but just going back to these projects for the philosophy and how we approach projects is something that is a really good reminder of what we're trying to do, and what's sort of enjoyable and fun about this job that we are doing.
Do you find that inspiration like this comes quite naturally to you, or does it only come when you're actively looking for it?
I think I just realized during this lockdown that I have to do to get inspired. I have to do for it. Being locked inside for 6 months and not being able to travel, not being able to see exhibitions, art, beautiful things, it makes it very, very difficult to be inspired. And this is something that I obviously took for granted, because and now, luckily, we're going back to normal, so I started to travel again because of work, and I can see exhibitions and beautiful things, and especially during this design festival as well. But I think you have to actively source inspiration and search for inspiration. And also, you have to train your eye, I think. It's so important that the more you see, the more you draw. It's also a muscle that you have to work on. And also, this is a great way of finding your true design language, is to see as many diverse source of inspiration as possible, and being able to decide what you like, what you don't like, if you like it, why do you like it, just really being very analytic about it.
I think with starting a project, putting in the research hours are just as key, I imagine, as anything else. So kind of blocking out that time to say, right, I'm going to find inspiration for this, rather than expecting it to be in your Rolodex. I think your eye is particularly trained, because I remember talking to you once about the film Call Me By Your Name. And you had a very specific take out from that film, which I didn't have.
Yes. So, I love movies, obviously, and I love movie sets, and Call Me By Your Name is a movie I watched several times because it's just such a beautiful piece of work. But specifically the library, father's library in the movie, inspired me greatly, because it's got such a beautiful atmosphere. But the wallpaper that they used on the walls of his library is actually a fabric that I used as my curtains, because I just loved those, the pattern and the colors. And now I think it's quite like it's a Dalar fabric, but at the time when I watched the movie, I was just very intrigued. I had no idea what it was, but I was very happy to find out that it's a fabric that you can purchase.
If you had a room, this is more a question for myself, if I'm honest. If you have a room and it's pretty much done, but you're looking for finishing touches, where would you find inspiration for that? Would you just look at the room and think about what's in the room, or would you mood board or think about for specific things?
Finishing touches in terms of...
So specifically rugs. I'm wondering if you would look at the room and think about, okay, I'm inspired by the curtains you've gone for, or the wall colour, or whether the rug itself would require its own kind of mood.
I think it really depends on everything else that's in the room. But if you're lacking color, it's a great way to introduce color, softness, texture, pattern. I think, rugs can turn a room around, really, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, really. But I think it's always nice to, if you want to use color in your rug, then something similar, like a complementary color is nice to come back, maybe on the lampshades or on the trim of the curtain, or something that is, it ties the room together rather than just the colorful rug and everything else.
I think I need to flex my inspiration muscle a bit more. What are you being inspired by at the moment?
I'm trying to go out and about as much as I can. See as many exhibitions as I can, and I'm going to travel to Parma next week, finally, to the Vintage Fair, and I just can't wait, because those antique fairs are always one of the biggest sources of inspiration, and something that I have endless, thousands of pictures of these fairs, even of the items that we don't purchase, but just the design of furniture and lighting and the manufacturing of it, and I find that extremely inspiring. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to.
Do you bring those pictures back to the Linda Bronco Design Studio team?
Yes, of course.
And sift through them together and piece them together?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a collaborative experience?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very collaborative, and we try to go to these fairs together, or if we can't, then we rotate. So once I go, then next time the senior designer goes. So I think it's so important that people experience it firsthand. And yes, we are always sharing. We have a WhatsApp group, and we're just sending pictures to each other if we are not together in the office. It's very important. I think one of the greatest parts of working in a team, which I enjoy the most, is inspiring each other.
Are you training the younger team members or the less experienced team members to flex that inspiration muscle?
Well, I think we're trying to select people who already have a strong urge of curiosity, and yes, I'm always sending out, tips of going here, going there, things I've seen, or organize movie nights when we come together and watch an interesting movie, and yeah, I mean, it's just the best way of getting different sorts of visual impact on our projects.
What was the last movie you saw that inspired you?
So actually, I was just putting these pictures together, and that reminded me of the I Am Love movie, which I haven't seen for so long. So that's the next movie we're gonna watch together.
Brilliant. And I think it's really interesting as well, the pictures that have been scrolling past, and I've kind of been catching them out of my corner of my eye as they've been going. They've been so varied and so different. Is there a common thread between these pictures? Are they all for one project, or are they just things that generally you like?
I was just trying to think about what inspires me and how I get inspired. But for example, this one is the Little Beach House project in Barcelona, in Garraf, and the ceiling pattern, the lattice details. That was, the inspiration came from obviously walking around the streets and seeing how that little fishing village is actually communicating their own brand and the colors they use and the little motifs that they use. So we try to apply that for the project, and obviously with Amsterdam as well, just being in this beautiful building and just seeing the cityscape that informed a lot of the design decisions that we made, from the shape of the headboards to the pattern of the rugs or the color of the fabrics. And it's just, it comes really naturally. But when I had to think about it for this talk, I realized that, yes, a lot of it is actually us seeking that constant inspiration. And it's something that we are actively doing. It's not something that just comes overnight.
Have there been mood boards or things that have inspired you that then haven't translated to the real world? Have there been things that seem so good on paper or so wonderful in film, and then the reality of the building you're trying to put them into, or the space you're trying to put them into, that haven't filtered through?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sure there were, but I think these probably would have fallen out from the very beginning of the design process, because what's so important, I think, is not taking design as seriously as it would jeopardize a project or a building. I think the architecture needs to speak the loudest, and functionality should first and foremost be the most important thing. Design is very important, but I don't think we can be selfish to try to manifest an amazing furniture piece that would never function or would just feel out of place in a certain building. So yeah, all these inspirations are either from that specific building that the project was located, or like, for example, the block printing technique that we did a lot of bespoke block prints for Soho House Mumbai, that are always very location specific, and we're always trying to be very, very respectful for the culture and the environment and the architecture where the projects are located at.
I'm wondering how often at the end of a project, if you were to go back and look at the initial mood board, I'm wondering how often how closely they seem like they link.
Yeah, it varies. Sometimes it's very similar. Sometimes it's the first idea is the best idea, and other times project just evolves so much. And usually it's because of time as well. I think Soho House Mumbai is a really great example where when I started on the project, I was still working at Martin Brudnizki, and I left and lived in Sydney, and I worked for Woods Bagot and Tara Bernard, and I went back and worked at Soho House, and then a year later, that project was on my desk again. So it just, that took probably 6 or more years to complete. So over time, you do come back to design decisions and question it, or just everybody gets a bit bored of it. And I think you need to feel excited about design, and even if it's a good idea at the time and it's still a good idea 5 years later, you sometimes just need a little refresh or something just to feel people a bit jiggy about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm going to throw open to questions from the floor now. I'm sure people are dying to ask Linda something, so if anybody has anything, do raise your hand and we can.
For your design process, during the concept stage or maybe later on, do you prefer sketching or do you use the computer software? And maybe how do you kind of realize your idea going from the mood board to the finished product?
From the very beginning, we usually do mood boards. I like to do specific photography or art and put them on a mood. And then sketching comes a little bit later when we do bespoke design and work out details, joinery details. And that's when we start sketching more.
Are there any specific computer programs that you would recommend?
So we use InDesign a lot, Photoshop, AutoCAD. SketchUp is very useful, just to work out joinery details, bespoke furniture details. And for visuals, it depends on the client. Sometimes they prefer the freehand sketches as a 3D visual or a CGI. I personally prefer the sketches because I feel like they have a sense of hand. They just feel a little bit warmer. They're a little bit more abstract, and I think 3D like realistic visuals, they can just be so cold, and people take them very literally. And being in a space, it never feels like a 3D visual. So, but that just depends on the request of the client, obviously.
I'm amazed now, when I was watching Grand Designs recently, I'm amazed at the way the technology has moved on to be able to create those 3D spaces. But I imagine, as you said, that is very hampering because it seems so real now that people expect that quite literally.
Yes.
Is that quite
But
hard?
I mean, you can't feel the materials, you can't smell the wood, you can't feel the sunshine. I mean, it's just all the things that adds to the experience. You don't have that. So I find it very sterile, but very, very useful tool for sure.
Great. Are there any more questions from the floor at all? Hi.
Mumbai.
So how long would it take for the White City project from the beginning?
So White City took about 2.5 years.
And how long would you expect it to be, sort of like current? Would you expect it to last for a decade or even longer?
Well, just the reality of a club space is that they need to withhold stronger usage than an airport lounge, for example. So, and also I think because of the members, it just requires a certain refresh from time to time. So while we're trying to design things to last and also use materials that are durable and bulletproof, I think from the aesthetic point of view, they do require refresh from time to time just to keep people excited and interested in the spaces. So probably every few years.
I think the point Linda was making earlier as well about Soho House Miami. So when Linda was working at Martin Brudnitsky, who was doing that...
Mumbai.
Sorry, Mumbai. Oh, sorry.
You did Miami, but it's okay.
Oh, but you did work on Miami, didn't you?
No.
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 Oh, I get confused. But Martin Brudnitsky worked on Miami, right?
Yes,
and you started there.
I started there when they were still working on that.
Right.
But I did some bits, but not entirely.
Fair enough. Any more questions from the floor? Yeah.
We recently supplied book collections for Babington. But in your current project, I was wondering how often do you need books for your clients for your projects? Is it something that's kind of it's a sort of last minute decision, or is it something in your kind of overall planning right from the start?
It really depends on the client brief, but luckily a lot of clients request books. It's mainly for commercial purposes. When we are working on a hospitality project, when it's a residential client, usually they have their own collection. But yes, it's definitely something that we always have to pay attention to and build into the scheme and make sure that we have enough space for it, and obviously budget concerns as well. So yes, luckily I think people are going back to using books and loving books more and more, which I really love.
It's certainly much more of a kind of homely feel.
Absolutely.
Yes, please.
Pip, if we have a question from the audience, would you be able to repeat it back so we can all hear it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we can't pass the microphone around,
Sure.
so that would be brilliant. Thank you.
I was just wondering where artwork features in your design process, if you see it's quite an important starting point sometimes for some designs, or whether your clients, ask you to source the artwork for these projects, or whether you have pieces that you then bring into projects.
Yes. So
The question was about artwork and how Linda folds it into her projects and whether it's a starting point or whether it becomes part of the room.
Artwork is extremely important, and even when we don't have an artwork collection for a project from the starting point, because it's a brand new project, we always consider art. And it is actually something that I forgot to mention, but it's usually part of our mood boards as well, because art can elevate or lighten a scheme so much through humor and color and just the graphics. And so we love using art to complement the interior scheme. And then with residential, it's often something that's a starting point, because beautiful art is something that people collect over time, and they have a very personal attachment to them. So when they move houses, they will usually bring their own artwork as well. So for example, now we're working on a project in London where the client has a beautiful, extensive art collection. So that was probably step 2 after just initial site walk, is to decide which art could go where in the new house, and that's the time, and obviously that's a very, very important starting point for our schemes. How we usually work is we work with art consultants for projects where we don't have art, and we usually have a brief. We decide which walls could take art, would like to have art, and we work very closely hand in hand with the art consultant, deciding on the actual pieces. And we love to commission artists as well to do murals or furniture, stenciling, or just as a complementary, as being even more integrated into the scheme rather than just hanging on the wall.
How do you find, with an art consultant, though, I'm at the point now where I don't have much art. It's not something I've collected over the years, and certainly don't have anything for the space for my own home. But so I'm at the point now where I have an almost finished room, and I need some art to go in there. But I feel really a bit icky about buying art to go with the room that doesn't have a story, that's something that I'm drawn to.
So from a personal experience, I buy art that I love,
Yeah.
and I don't really consider everything else. And I think for your own home, it's a bit like, everything goes. And I think when we are designing a project as well, where the art is a starting point, we also try not to compose everything too much around art. It is a consideration that it's there, and obviously we're not gonna choose colors that are fighting that artwork, but you have to think that it's something that is organic, and it's laid back, and it's your home, so it doesn't have to be everything have to be perfect. It has to be something that truly speaks to you, and you love the colors of it, you love the story of it, or something. But it's something that's gonna probably stay with you over your interiors, even if you move houses. So.
Great. I think there was another question. At the back there.
So I'm just interested in your process from when you get a new project and you start, exploring images and going around and getting inspiration. And how do you then sort of take images like these, for example, and sort of pull the ideas out to make them new and fresh and different for your project? Is there things that you sort of naturally do? Do you sketch them or?
So the question was just about how you take an image like this that's quite abstract maybe and pull the inspiration out and make it a reality.
So usually when we start a project, it depends if it's a commercial or residential. But if it's a commercial project, we usually walk site. We go on site. We have to take a lot of brief from the client. So it's a lot of listening at the beginning, and obviously we have a goal. It's a commercial goal of what the client is trying to achieve with the space. So we I think after that first meeting, after the first initial site walks and the first briefing, we have a very specific idea of what we are trying to achieve. And then these mood boards are the expressive version, or the extensive version of what we're then trying to achieve, and look specifically to that project. So what we're trying to always explain is the mood boards are evoking a feeling, and it's a generic idea. And then when we move on to the next stage after the first initial mood boards, that's when we are trying to be very specific. So we'll be then trying to move away from the overall look and feel and just zooming into specific details. For residential clients, we usually don't use these very grand abstract mood boards, because I don't think people understand very well, or they necessarily respond to it, or they might get a little bit scared of what they're getting. So we are being we're trying to skip that phase and just be more specific around the design language, the finishes specifically, the furniture specifically, and we do a lot of bespoke design. So I think the majority of our furniture and lighting is probably bespoke or vintage. And so this is why most of our images are just an inspiration, and when we start to develop it further, the client can actually see the specific piece, but it's not a copy of anything else that they've seen before. So that eliminates the fact that we are copying something.
Have you learned how far you can take an initial mood board with a private client? Because presumably not, most people aren't as creative as you, most people don't have the vision as you, the same vision as you, so it's about learning what is comfortable for them.
So I burnt myself before, I have to admit, and I think it's just, residential clients require a lot of conversation at the very beginning. It's almost like dating someone, and then after that, you probably have a strong feeling about if they can take it or not, and if they have the visual capacity or they have the openness to take that, and if they do, that's great. But when they don't. Then, it happened to me before, years ago, where I showed something really abstract to a private client, and they completely freaked out, and I had to, sit them down and explain that it's actually not what they're getting. It's an inspiration, and it's just a lot of talking, it's a lot of communicating, and trying to really hone into what we're trying to achieve rather than a picture that they're getting.
Yeah, I'm about to show my bathroom mood boards to my husband, and I'm trying to make it as literal as possible to get as much as I want over the line. So we'll see how it goes. Any more questions for? Yes, please. So that question was about when you're first meeting a residential client, what sort of questions do you ask to find out who they are, what they like, what they need?
So it's a lot about communication. Now during this pandemic phase, it was very difficult because obviously I could only meet them through Zoom, and I have clients who I still haven't met. So it's a lot of asking questions about what they've done, how they lived, where they lived, what they studied, what their interests are, if I can get a glimpse of their current home, of the kind of clothes they love, like the patterns, the artwork, any existing artwork. And we usually send out a questionnaire. And that questionnaire consists of questions such as your favorite childhood memory, to your favorite scent, or your favorite city, favorite short-term escape, long-term escape, favorite restaurant, favorite hotel. Just trying to get a glimpse into their personality and lifestyle as much as possible. And so far, everyone has been quite open and happy to share these with us, because a lot of it is like quite intimate questions about childhood memories and such. But I feel like this really helped us paint a picture about our client, and then hopefully we can do a much better job in integrating maybe some of these elements into the design and making it highly personal.
The childhood memory question is a really interesting one, because I can understand the literal value in asking them their favorite hotel, because you go, okay, that's the design they like. Childhood memory is so abstract. Where do you go with that information?
Like, for example, I don't know, one client answered, I remember playing with my siblings and in the water, and I just immediately, you just get a gut feel about that person, about, okay, so relationships are very important for her, and for this client, we actually designed a family club. So it's a club for 6 siblings, and so obviously that just reinforced the fact that these siblings are so close together, and just really informed us how we should space plan the space, how we should be very flexible about the furniture, and also about, they love outdoors, they are very playful, they're very fun. So, they have a lot of hidden meanings, these answers, which really help us with the process.
So interesting. Any more questions for any more? No? Oh, one over here, yep.
Own
you handle that, because there's disconnecting the machines. It's a very good
This
question.
is about handling budgets, how you handle it over here and abroad. Is that right?
A project, yeah.
Projects. Oh, sorry. No, I didn't even hear that.
Budgets.
How you handle projects abroad. Yeah.
Yeah, budgets are important.
Budgets are, I was like, well, this is going in a different direction,
wanna
but
talk about
equally
that.
interesting.
No, project. It's a very good question, and it's very difficult, especially now. It's very timely. So how we handle projects is we usually have a mini team on location. So currently we have a project in Los Angeles, in Hong Kong, in Sydney, in Madrid, in Vienna, and also in London. And so the European projects we are happy to handle from London. And also every project is being handled by London mainly, but we always have a little local team as well who are just doing site visits, meeting with the client, doing local sourcing, and when it comes to site, they are there continuously and monitoring the progress and process. And it usually doesn't consist of more than, at peak times, 4, sometimes just 1 person, but this is just the way how I used to work at Soho House, and I feel very comfortable working, and also I'm lucky enough to have a network wide enough that I have people dotted around the world who I know, I trust, and we worked together before, so we understand each other really well.
Great. Any more questions at all? No? In that case, I think we are done. Linda, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Linda, no wonder your designs are so rich in storytelling and artistry. Wouldn't it be amazing to go on holiday with Linda? To walk down a road, and now under your gimlet eye, you just spot things that most of us would just walk straight past, and pick up some amazing details. Your inspiration is so extraordinary, so wide-ranging, fashion, architecture, movies, and so much more. And what I really got this morning was your passion for design. This has been the most fascinating session. Thank you, Linda, and thank you, Pip, for steering the conversation so beautifully. Let's give them a huge round of applause.